Okay, so we can, do you have their names of the participants?
I have, hello everybody, just quickly gonna do a quick roll call here. I see a number of 617-839-3810. Who is this person? And I also see a number of 1-857-274-4322. I see Bruce Bowling Jr., Caroline Downing, Hamad Abshari, Alex Kirakakidis, Phineas Fowler, and Roger Mann. Brad Nickel has joined.
Okay. Are they muted, or what do you have?
Everybody's muted. Yes, that's the only folks unmuted are us as panelists. Will present.
Okay. All right. We will start.
2 minutes, Bashir?
Yes. Let me see what the time is. It's about 6:10. We will start.
Very good.
Hello, everyone. We will start in about 2 minutes. We just want to give folks the opportunity to join the meeting. So we will start in about 2 minutes.
For everyone who's joined and is identified by phone, if you so choose, you can rename yourself as a name. Again, that's up to the individual participant if they choose to do that.
All right. Time is about 6:10. We have waited a little bit to give folks the opportunity to join the meeting. So we will now start. Good evening, all, and welcome to tonight's public meeting. This meeting is to provide opportunity for public participation in the MBTA project to replace the East Cottage Street Bridge and Norfolk Avenue Bridge, both of which carry our Fairmont line over the streets. These bridges are located in the neighborhood of Roxbury and Dorchester. My name is Bashir Madamidola. I am the MBTA project manager for the project being presented tonight. We acknowledge the presence of state senators and state representatives, honorable councillors, the legislative staff, City of Boston officials, emergency services, and all others on Zoom tonight. Now, in order to make today's Zoom meeting orderly, we have some rules to follow. Next slide, please. So on the slide, for those that are dialing in via their computer, you will see the list of rules that we have. Because some folks might be calling in on their phone, I will go through these rules. In the interest of presenting the information clearly, participants will be muted during project presentation. If a participant has a question during the presentation, please enter question into the Q&A box and press send. The host can reply your questions via the Q&A option, and that response will be visible in the Q&A window. Questions may be addressed at the end of the presentation. For participants that prefer to ask questions verbally at the end, they should raise their hands by clicking on participant and then the dash button at the bottom of that window. The host shall then unmute the participant to ask the question. Now, if you are calling on your phone, please enter *9 to raise your hand. When a participant asks a question, we will ask you to please state your name, your title, and any affiliation that you may have. As always, we would like to recognize our elected officials by allowing them to ask questions first before other attendees. And so that you know, this meeting is being recorded. So those are the rules that we will follow tonight. But before we start the meeting formally, I will like to ask if there's any elected official that has any comment at this time. Remember, please press *9 to raise your hand, and then we can recognize you. So otherwise, if you're calling on your computer, please use the hand raise button. You're welcome. All right, so let's get started. As part of our bridge program, the MBTA carries out a regular inspection of our bridge structures. The MBTA Railroad Bridge over East Cottage Street and Norfolk Avenue are about 100 years old and have been found to be structurally deficient. That means that elements of those bridges must be monitored and repaired. If this action is not taken, they will eventually become unsafe to carry train load. For these two bridges, detailed engineering study completed in 2019 recommended that they be replaced. This will involve installing a new superstructure and repairing the foundations. We're currently at the 75% stage of design. The design is therefore still developing, and we look forward to your comments and feedbacks. The MBT project consultant for this project is WSP. The WSP team is led by Ms. Philomena Maybury, and they're here tonight to provide an overview of the project. Now I will call on WSP to present the project. Ms. Maybury will present the technical design and construction overview. Ms. Rachel Buckard will present the traffic management. Their presentation will be followed by question and answer session. So, Ms. Maybury, you may present the project.
Thank you, Bashir. Welcome everybody to this project presentation. As Bashir mentioned, the project goal is to replace 2 bridges along the Fairmont line, one that go over the East Cottage Street Bridge and one that goes over Norfolk Avenue in the Dorchester neighborhood. On the screen at the moment is the agenda of our presentation. I won't go through the agenda in detail, but it gives an overview of the different topics that we'll be discussing. This is a locus map showing the location of the East Cottage Street Bridge and the Norfolk Avenue Bridge, which, as we've mentioned, is along the Fairmont commuter line in the neighborhood, Dorchester neighborhood. This slide is essentially the same thing, but an aerial view that shows the neighborhood in real time, and again depicting up at the top of the photograph the Norfolk Avenue Bridge along the Fairmont line and the East Cottage Street Bridge down at the bottom of the photo. We've also highlighted here the Borough Street properties, which we'll discuss a little bit further. And this just gives an overall aerial view of the bridge site, which if you're a resident, you are probably familiar with. As Bashir mentioned, the project is to replace 2 existing bridges along the Fairmont line that cross over East Cottage Street and Norfolk Avenue. These bridges are old structures. They were both constructed in 1906, making them over 100 years old. And although they've performed well, they are reaching the end of their life. And as such, have risen to the top of the priority list in terms of the MBTA's bridge program for replacement. The main reason the bridges are being replaced is because they do not meet current statutory loading requirements. However, there are other reasons. As you can see from these 2 photographs, these are the bridge decks up at the right of way. These are what are called open deck bridges. They are not ballasted over the bridges. The MBTA, for maintenance and vertical alignment purposes, prefers to have ballasted deck bridges. So that is a modification that is going to be made when we replace these bridges. They're fairly small bridges in terms of typical sizes. East Cottage Street is a 43-foot span. The Norfolk Avenue Bridge is a slightly longer bridge at a 63-foot 8 span. And they're both about 30 feet wide, accommodating both the inbound and outbound tracks along the Fairmont line. If you drive by the neighborhood and you take a look up at these bridges, you'll likely think they don't look in that bad a shape. They're freshly painted, and they don't, to the naked eye, appear to be deteriorating or in bad shape. However, as inspections over the normal frequency have revealed, as well as WSP's condition assessment performed last year, these bridges do show significant deterioration at various locations of the steel elements, as seen in these photographs, and which are section losses to the steel structure, which result in substatutory loading ratings. So they do require replacement in order to meet current loading requirements. This is a photograph at each of these photographs are at each of the bridges. The left photograph is East Cottage Street Bridge, and you can see the bridge superstructure or the steel elements up at the top of the photograph, supported by concrete abutment structures. Similarly, for the Norfolk Avenue Bridge, again, a steel structure supported on concrete abutments. If you can see that there are essentially, it might not be very completely clear, but there are essentially 4 girders that comprise these 2 bridges, 2 girders for each inbound and outbound track. These structural schemes, which are very prevalent back in the early 1900s, are what we call fracture critical bridges. What that means is, if either of these bridges were ever severely damaged to the point where they no longer could support the load they're intended to support, there is no redundancy built in these structural designs, and it would result in having to close the bridge and therefore having to close the Fairmont line. Having these types of structural designs along the MBTA system does leave the MBTA vulnerable to that situation. And that is another reason why these bridges rise to the level of top of a priority for replacement. As it relates to the abutment structures, as you can see here, the two concrete structures seen in these photographs, they are in generally good condition. They do not exhibit any signs of deflection, settlement, or major deterioration. However, again, they were built in the early 1900s, and they do not, as is, meet the statutory requirements of today. So our bridge project will proposes to replace the steel portion of the bridge superstructure in its entirety and strengthen the existing concrete abutments by the means of both horizontal and vertical elements called tiebacks and micropiles. This work will be done, the superstructural replacements, excuse me, will be done over the course of 4 weekend closures of the Fairmont line, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail about how that is going to be accomplished. The strengthening of the abutment structures will occur during normal business hours and will require a lane closure, which again, we'll talk about in more detail later, and Rachel will talk about the traffic impacts to both of these activities. The 4 weekend outages will require complete closures of both East Cottage Street and Norfolk Avenue, not at the same time. And the substructure strengthening work will require lane takings that will occur during the day, and we'll address how we intend to manage the traffic during those individual operations. The next 4 slides I'm going to go through fairly quickly. They're just engineering drawings of the elevation, the longitudinal sections and elevations, cross sections of the bridge rather. This is the longitudinal section of the East Cottage Street Bridge. As I mentioned earlier, it's a 43-foot span bridge, a fairly short span. As you can see from this drawing, the existing vertical clearance is 18'9", which is well above the required City of Boston minimum of 16.5. And our proposed bridge will not infringe on that. In fact, we will likely improve that by a few inches. Similarly, on the Norfolk Avenue Bridge, again, slightly longer span at 63'8". And again, the existing vertical clearance is 18'8". But we will not infringe on that and will likely improve the vertical clearance with our proposed bridge superstructure replacements. As I mentioned, the existing bridges are comprised of 2 girders, fracture critical girders as I called them, that each support both the inbound and outbound tracks. This is a cross section of what we propose to replace the superstructure with, which as you can see is a multi-girder arrangement, 9 girders, which provides that redundancy that I had mentioned earlier, and really gives the MBTA, makes the design redundant in terms of introducing, if one of these bridges were to ever be damaged and need to be repaired, it could be done without having to close the bridge or implement an outage of the Fairmont line. Similarly, the cross section at Norfolk Avenue, slightly deeper girder because of the longer span and the heavier load, but again, 9 bridges with a redundant structural system. As I mentioned, we will not be demolishing or removing the existing concrete abutment structures. They're in good condition, and that is a huge benefit to the project to not have to do that. That would be a significant undertaking and a much bigger project. But we do, as I mentioned, have to strengthen these structures because of their age. They were not designed for current statutory requirements. And we intend to do that by the installation of micropiles, which will be installed from the right-of-way level or the track level through the abutment wall. Some of this work will have to occur at night, and some of it will occur during single track operation on the weekends. The tiebacks will be installed at street level, and those are horizontally drilled elements to provide additional lateral resistance to the abutment structures. These, again, will be done during the day, but will require a lane closure. And the intent is to leave a lane open, have a police detail directing traffic, and to maintain pedestrian access. And again, Rachel will talk about that in a little more detail further in the presentation. For the MBTA to provide the contractor with some space nearby, the MBTA is undertaking an agreement with the owners of some vacant parcels on Borough Street, which is adjacent to Norfolk Avenue. These parcels are owned by both the City of Boston and a private entity, and the MBTA is currently finalizing those agreements. This is another photograph of the Borough Street parcels to give you a little more context in terms of where it's located with relation to Norfolk Avenue. It's perpendicular to Norfolk Avenue. And as you can see in the lower left-hand corner of the photograph, there's the Fairmont line, which crosses the Norfolk Avenue, which is the bridge we'll be replacing, and the red area represents the Borough Street parcels. Again, these are privately owned, so the MBTA will be seeking a private agreement to temporarily acquire these parcels. They are in close proximity to the Norfolk Avenue Bridge and will be very useful for the contractor. We envision that the contractor will place his field trailer there, as well as store materials that he will need to use nearby for some of the concrete abutment work and repairs, as well as other storage for equipment and materials of that sort. The contractor will be required to secure this site during non-working hours. And we understand that Borough Street is already a tight throughway, both with residents using it for parking as well as being a two-way street. So we will have written in the contract documents that contractor employees will not be allowed to park along Borough Street. And as I mentioned, the space will serve for the contractor's lay-down area for material storage and equipment storage and some staging. Other lay-down areas that the MBTA has identified for the contractor's use for this project exist along Alexander Street. This is a existing MBTA property along Alexander Street and between Alexander Street and the Fairmont line, just south of Uplands Corner. This will also be offered to the contractor as a potential lay-down area for equipment and material. And because of its proximity to the right-of-way adjacent to it, it may very well be used as one of the contractor's access to the right-of-way on the rail line. One of the important assets that we have been able to add to the project is securing the Readville Yard, which is an MBTA property, for the contractor's use during this project. What securing this space allows us, the contractor, to do is to have all of the beam replacement elements brought and transported to Readville Yard, stored at Readville Yard, and there is sufficient space at Readville for the assembly of the bridges. This is in close proximity to the Fairmont line and will allow for transport of those steel elements that are being replaced by rail versus truck. What this does, and the MBTA did a lot of work to secure this space and all the coordination required to secure the space at Readville Yard, but this was really important to the MBTA in minimizing the impact to the public. This will minimize the use of city streets for the material transport. As I mentioned, those heavy long beams that have to be typically transported by very large trucks, and those are not easily navigatable through city streets. It avoids the need to worry about that. It also avoids the need for additional cranes and significant lifts of these bridge assemblies during and near the community. And all of this results in significantly minimizing the disruption caused by this project to the public. This is just another plan view of the Readville yard, again, owned by the MBTA. This shows in plan the area that the contractor will have at their disposal to not only store the bridge girders, but also to perform the assembly. Each of the 4 bridge halves that will be installed at each of the bridge sites will be assembled in this area. They will be loaded onto flatbed cars and transported via rail over the course of 4 weekend outages to the bridge sites for installation. Again, having this area for our use and for the contractor's use is a huge benefit to the project, and really does quite a bit in terms of minimizing the heavy duty construction that actually has to occur near the bridge sites, and as a result, minimizing the disruption to the neighborhood and the abutters. This is just another view of the Readville yard, showing the various elements that exist out here and the area where the bridges will be assembled. And, you know, this is proven. The MBTA has used this location for other bridge projects, including the Shoreline Bridge that was assembled and transported in a similar fashion. So we know that it works. As I mentioned, each of the 4 bridge halves will be assembled and transported via 4 independent weekend closures to install the bridge halves. Here we have an animation showing the various elements of the various activities to get that accomplished. The micropile and tieback installations that I mentioned earlier that will occur on the abutment structures at the sites will have already been done prior to the weekend work, the weekend closure work. So the tiebacks will have been in, the micropiles will have been installed from the top of the abutment, and the supportive excavation at the right-of-way will already be in place before the weekend closure work starts. The weekend closure will start sometime about 10 p.m. on a Friday night and continue during the week for the entire weekend until about 4 or 5 a.m. on a Monday morning, and be ready for the Fairmont line to pick up normal service at that time. During these weekends, the MBTA will be providing busing as an alternative for the Fairmont line passengers. During the weekend work, the bridge will be demolished. As I mentioned, a flatbed car will come down from Readville. The demolished section of the bridge will be loaded onto the flatbed car and taken away, again via rail, back to Readville. The approach slabs will be installed. These will be precast concrete elements that will be ready to be picked and installed. The new bridge will again come in via rail. The new bridge will be put into place. The track and rail, ties, everything reinstated, ready again for Monday morning. So this represents the work that will occur during 1 weekend outage on the inbound side. 2 consecutive weekends, and both inbound sides of the bridges will be installed. Similarly, same thing, I'm not going to take as long on this side. Same activities will occur on the outbound side. Demolition, bring in the precast approaches, bring in the new bridge, put it in place, reinstate the track work, ready for revenue service on Monday morning. And we'll have 2 weekend closures to accomplish this work, 1 weekend at Norfolk Avenue and 1 weekend in East Cottage Street. With that, I'm going to invite Rachel to please discuss the impacts of traffic.
Well, good evening. My name is Rachel Burkhart. I'm a civil engineer at WSP and work with Phil and Bashir on this project here. So I want to talk a little bit about the detour roads and the closures that Philomena had mentioned in this regard. So this is, on this slide here, we have a map of the area, and there's 2 red circles at the 2 bridge locations at Norfolk Avenue and East Cottage Street. And then there is the detour roads are highlighted in yellow. And the idea of the detour is that when work is happening that's going to either partially or fully close the site at the bridge, we would have signs up before people go into the neighborhood to say, through traffic needs to detour. So the detour routes include Columbia Road, Dudley Street, Magazine Street, and Mass Ave. So for example, if they're doing the first weekend at Norfolk Avenue, to get there from Columbia Road, you would take the right at East Cottage Street. So right at that location, we'd have a big sign that would say construction happening at Norfolk Avenue, local traffic only, and then the through traffic should detour. So that would guide people through the detour down south on Columbia Road to Upham's Corner, take the right turn onto Dudley Street under the tracks, and then over to East Cottage if you're headed in that direction, or if you need to get to Norfolk Avenue, you continue down, take the right turn by St. Patrick's onto Magazine Street, and then you get to Norfolk Avenue. So the idea of this is whatever work is going on here, we'll have the signs up, detour the through traffic so it's not, people aren't trying to get down the narrow streets in the neighborhood here through the residential streets, and instead stay on the bigger streets and avoid coming through when construction is going on. So on the next slide here, we'll show you some examples of what we're talking about for closures. This one here is looking at Norfolk Avenue, and we're looking towards Columbia Road at this point here. And it just happens that in this view that we captured from Google Street View that one of the utility companies is out doing some work, and on the picture on the left, we see kind of the same setup that they're using that we would use, is namely we've closed the sidewalk on one side of the road, closed the road down for all but one lane, and then what that would allow for is work on one side of the street. So if they're working on the abutments and drilling in the tiebacks or doing some other masonry work to touch up the abutments, they can do that on one side of the road while we maintain traffic alternating in one lane, and then we also have one sidewalk open so people can walk past. So we would do that on one side of the road and then flip it over to the other side of the road. And then, so this is typically weekdays 9 to 3, so we avoid the peak hour traffic here. And during the non-work hours, they would take down this setup and the full street would be available for passage. So you'd have both sidewalks and both lanes of the street would be open at that time. So in the view on the right here, we show a little more of the closure here. So for those weekends, as Philomena had explained, we'd be taking out the girders and replacing them from the bridge. And to do that, even though we're going to be transporting by a rail car, we still need to get a big crane out there because they're really heavy. So we'd have a big crane sitting in the street would be closed off, and that crane would lift the girders onto the rail car, and then when they bring in the new bridge, lift the girders off the rail car into there. So because that's a really heavy construction work, the only safe way to do that is to close the street down. But we would maintain access to everybody's houses here during that time, so no one couldn't get to their residence or their business. So if we go to the next slide here, this is looking the other way. So this is if you're coming from Columbia Road, you look and you see here. So in these two pictures, immediately if you were to turn to your right, you would see the Eversource site there. And so again, the idea here in the picture at the left is we would take all but one lane to do work on the concrete abutment during the weekday work periods. And then for the weekend full closures, which is only 2 weekends for bridge, just to emphasize that. And what we say on the road closures, Phil had said the operations might end at 10 o'clock, but we need to close the road a little earlier at 9. And then the road probably won't be open until about 6 on Monday. So the rail operations will start a little later and get going a little earlier on that day, but then the contractor has to demobilize all their equipment and their crane and all of that stuff, so they need a little more time to do that. So that's kind of the overall idea. We have some more pictures here just of what it looks like at East Cottage Street, same idea. So this is looking at Roby Road here, and again, we're looking towards Columbia. This is the residential side here, and the picture on the left shows, you know, we would just close one part of the road. They'll leave one lane and one sidewalk open, and then in the full closure, again, leave access for people to get to their houses, but on the other hand, you know, close off the road when the big crane is doing the work over the weekend. So that is kind of a summary of that. Actually, we got one more slide here that shows it from the opposite direction. So this is just looking the other way, coming from Columbia Road, and then there's a couple of industrial sites on either side. So the work zone here would leave access into their driveways, and then we would, you know, just take the street beyond their driveways, either for the partial closure or the full closure. So that's a summary of that. And during the Q&A, if you know, folks may have some suggestions here on some enhancements perhaps to the traffic management or other concerns, you know, so we look forward to that in the Q&A. And then moving along here, one other thing Phil asked me to talk about is the utilities. So, you know, whereas on some bridge projects you have to dig up the street for various reasons here, because those abutments, as Phil said, the big concrete abutments are in pretty good shape, we don't have to actually dig up the street for anything here. And we're not going to do that. We're not going to have any impacts on the utilities. So there's no situation where, you know, there'd be a loss of water service or anything like that during this, because we don't need to do that. The only thing we would do to protect the utilities is when they dig out the big crane, they usually put down those timber mats to spread the load out so it doesn't damage the utilities below the road. So with that, let me turn it back over to you, Phil.
Thank you, Rachel. So what we understand that, you know, everybody understands that construction projects can be noisy. As I mentioned, the MBTA has gone through great lengths to really try to move as much of the heavy construction out of the neighborhood, and that's being accomplished by the assembly and transport of the bridge sections that is going to occur at Readville Yard. So that is a huge way to mitigate any noise that would have occurred right in the neighborhood. The contractor there will still be activity at the bridge sites. There will still be the tieback operation, as well as the micropile installation and some other minor repairs to the bridge abutments themselves. Contractor will be required to submit a noise monitoring and control plan, and that will be submitted to the MBTA for review and approval. And that noise monitoring and control plan will be required to demonstrate the contractor's noise mitigation measures. And those will include, and some of those that are required include installing noise barriers where possible, implementing and having truck backup alarms that are ambient sensitive. We will be, you know, not allowing any truck idling beyond a maximum of 5 minutes, and there will be attention paid to equipment used during nighttime hours, and there will be limitations on that. So there is a sensitivity to noise and mitigating that to the community, and that will be communicated in the contract documents for the bidding contractors. The other thing that's important to talk about is the duration of the construction project. We estimate that this project will be about 1.5 to 2 years of construction. However, as noted here with the footnote 1, and we've talked about several times, much of that work is going to be happening at Readville Yard, which will be sort of out of sight, out of mind in terms of the community impact. We will need to impose 4 to 6 single track weekend outages to install some of the micropiles up at the track level. And as we've mentioned, for the installation of the 4 bridge halves, we will have to impose 4 weekend outages of the Fairmont line, where busing service will be provided as an alternate means of getting passengers to and from. So that is just a synopsis of the construction duration and some of the work windows. And with that, I think I'll turn it to Bashir, who's going to talk a little bit about some of the costs.
Thank you, Philomena, and thank you, Rachel. Let me just speak very briefly about the cost, and I will expand a little bit on the schedule. Starting with the schedule, we anticipate to have the final design submitted by mid-June or thereabout. Now, once we have those plans, we will take steps to advertise the project. And we anticipate that to be sometimes towards the end of July, that we should have the project advertised. It means that it will be in a position to issue the notice to proceed to the contractor by early fall of this year. We anticipate that the substantial completion will be by January of 2022, say spring of 2022. And the final completion by late spring of 2022. As for cost, the Norfolk bridge, it's a little bigger than the other one, than East Cottage. And so we anticipate the construction cost for that to be about 9 million. But on top of that will be other costs. So the total cost for Norfolk Avenue Bridge is about 14.5 million. For East Cottage Street Bridge, we anticipate a total cost of 12.5 million, with a breakdown of 8 million for the construction contract, and about 4.5 million for associated costs, bringing a total project cost to 27 million. Now, this project is fully funded for construction. The funding was via the FY20, fiscal year 20 to 25 CIP. MBTA anticipate that this project will be federalized. In other words, share the cost with the federal. Now, that said, the floor is now open for you to ask your questions. I will remind you to dial *9 on your phone if you are connecting to the presentation via your phone. You dial *9 and that will raise your hand, and then we can recognize you to ask your questions. If you are on your computer, please use the chat box and activate the raise hand icon on your control panel, and we'll similarly recognize you. But we will ask that the elected officials ask their questions at this point. Any elected official, we will ask that you ask your question at this point. Either a senator or a representative. Please ask your questions. Philomena, may I suggest this, that can we unmute folks, just in case people might have difficulty trying to connect?
Sure.
Okay, let's unmute. And now if we do have a background noise, I think we will mute back. Okay.
Have a little back.
I'm not sure it's gonna work, right? We just want to give folks opportunity to ask questions. So if there's no elected official on the line, honorable councilors, legislative staffs, or City of Boston officials, do we have emergency services personnel on the phone or on the webinar?
But
all right.
I have a question on the Q&A.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
This is a question from Bruce Bowling Jr.
Okay.
The question I had was regarding the partial closure times of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on weekdays. Many people use those streets to go to work throughout the day. I know the project could take 18 to 24 months, so I was wondering, is it possible for the partial closure schedule to align with the full closure schedule, which was geared more towards late night to very early morning. I can start answering this question.
Sure.
So, Bruce, the partial closure of 9 a.m. to 3 p.m. on the weekdays will be implemented to install the tieback elements. That has to be done in advance of the bridge replacements, which is the work that will be occurring during the full closure. So it is not possible to combine those activities together. However, every effort will be made during those partial closures. There'll be a police detail on site that will be managing the traffic and allowing through traffic, and obviously pedestrian traffic will be, pedestrian access will also be open at that time. So it is in direct answer to your question, it is not possible to combine those two. It would be great if we could, because the tieback installation has to be done before the new bridges are put in place.
Mm-hmm. So Phil here, just as I'm reading the question too, I think the other side of it is could the partial closures align more with the full closures, meaning that they're geared more towards late night to very early morning? So for example, is this the kind of work that you're doing, say, with the, with the tiebacks that could be done kind of overnight from like, say 9 p.m. to 5 a.m. or something, when it would not impact traffic? So the only other issue would really be the noise at night, but I don't know, Phil, if that's feasible to do.
I understand. Sorry, I think I actually misinterpreted the question a bit. Thank you for clarifying that. Again, that could be done, and as you mentioned, it's a trade-off between traffic during busy daytime hours versus noise at nighttime hours when folks tend to be at home during that time. So it is certainly something that could be looked at, and it would be a balance between competing benefits. Bruce, does that answer your question?
And let me just add a little bit of information to that also. The full closure that we are anticipating will take place over the weekends. We do not anticipate a full closure during the work week. So, so I know people do work during the weekend as well, but if that's helpful, I guess, but we ensure that the full closure is actually planned for weekends. I hope that addresses your question, Bruce.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, it does. Sorry, my video is off, but you can hear me. So yeah, that was my biggest concern, because I know that those are major streets, and I know it is going to be a lot of congestion, which could create definite angst in the community. And I know it is a trade-off, because if it is later in the night, it could be a lot of noise. I'm not privy to how much noise, so I don't know how loud it would be. So it may be more beneficial for it to be during the day, depending on the noise level. But I'm not really sure if there's a predictable factor of how loud that noise would be. So I mean, it depends. I don't know if you know, like, the average decibels of noise that usually come from a project of this magnitude. I'm not sure, but I know that if it isn't as noisy, I feel it would be more beneficial to align with the times of late night to early morning. That way, the majority of workers, because most of the workers in those communities do work 9 to 5 jobs. So I do feel that it would allow for workers to not have to worry about, detours, because it would be late night, and most people aren't waking up before 6 a.m. in those areas to work.
Right. Okay. we will certainly look at that as we prepare the contract package and to take advantage of where we can align activities to reduce impacts on the traffic. And I have to say also that in addressing that specific concern about traffic, we have worked closely with City of Boston Transportation Department. As a matter of fact, we have integrated a number of their suggestions in our traffic management plan that we presented tonight. And we continue to engage in that dialogue with the city. So all of it to ensure that we minimize traffic impact. And one other element of that is that, as you know, we are replacing 2 bridges. But just to ensure that we're proactive with respect to minimizing traffic impact, we plan this such that we don't close those 2 streets at the same time, Norfolk Avenue and East Cottage Street. So when we close East Cottage Street, Norfolk Avenue will be available for DETOUR, just to minimize the extent of DETOUR and vice versa. So all of this to say that we gave a great deal of thought to making sure that traffic impact is minimized. Thank you for the comment, Bruce.
No problem.
Any more questions relating to anything that we have discussed tonight? Anybody else can chip in that you ask your question via the chat or by just pressing *9 on your phone to raise your hand.
Just to add one more thing to clarify Bruce's question. Again, on the tieback installation, which is I think what you were referring to regarding the partial closure. The other thing that should be noted, we have an 18 to 24 month duration. However, that particular activity will not last more than 2 to 3 weeks, the tieback installation. So I think it's important to clarify that. That will not be an activity that will be ongoing, not even close to the full, that's no more than a month's worth of work. And we don't even think it'll take that long to install the tiebacks.
Okay, all right, so that makes it a little, different then, because I by the slides, I felt it was under the impression that the totality of the work of maybe both of those things would be 18 to 24 months, but I didn't know that particular partial closing would only last, 2 to 3 weeks.
Cool. That's right. So, just to clarify, the duration of the, as I mentioned, the duration 18 to 24 months includes the, start to finish of the construction contract, which much of that time is being spent transporting and assembling the bridge sections out at Readville Yard, which will not impact the community at all. These other activities, i.e. the tieback installation and the micropile, will not be ongoing that entire duration. In fact, far from it. The tieback operation is 2 to 3 weeks, and I think the micropile work will be about a month, maybe a month and a half. And again, some of that will be during just weekend outages and nighttime work. That won't be all day either. So those activities are short durations, and hopefully, is a little more palpable to the community.
Right, and the micropiles, to just add too, that's going to be done from the right of way, from the track bed, so that won't involve equipment that's down in the street. That won't involve the roadway being closed in the street or the sidewalks during that. It's just the tieback operations, and then after everything's done, there's a little bit of masonry touch-up work that will be needed to be done on the abutments for a couple of days, I think, at each location. So.
Very good. Any more questions? Well, while you might be getting your questions ready, let me just update you about steps that we have taken to address some of the other concerns. In fact, I saw there are some questions, other questions. Okay, I thought
We have 3 questions, Bashir.
Okay,
There are
okay.
follow-ups from Bruce.
Yeah, I wanted to be sure that we're not ignoring questions. So let me just talk a little bit about what we have done in terms of ensuring that we engage all the parties that we consider essential. For example, the emergency services, we actually met with them. We had a coordination meeting with the emergency services on May 21st. And that involved the City of Boston staff, the Boston Emergency Management, the Boston Police, Boston Fire, Boston Ambulance Services, and Boston Public School Transportation. Now, each of these services provided us some feedback on the traffic management plan for the project. And essentially, they sign off on the plan that we currently have. The plans and the supporting activity that we presented tonight reflect the comment that we have received from those services. And we will continue to be in dialogue with the City of Boston and those emergency services folks as the design progresses. Now, one critical part of our planning is to establish communication channels during construction so that all the emergency services are informed in advance of any construction activity that are likely to impact traffic flow. Okay, and we plan to make this a requirement in the contract document itself, just to provide additional clarification. So, any more questions?
I don't see any additional questions in the chat.
Okay.
But if anybody would like to pose a verbal question, you can raise your hand in the participant window, and I will see that.
We might even try to unmute everybody and see whether, I just want to be sure folks are not having difficulty in getting across also. So we have unmuted the line and we wanted to ask if anyone asks any question. Does anyone has? All right. So I think we should mute the line back. Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, we do get a fair amount of background noise.
Sure. Yeah, because of the background noise. So I'll just make some final comments. Tonight we have presented to you this project that we believe is going to be beneficial, not just to MBTA, but to the public. And these bridges, we need to replace them. And we wanted to do it in such a way that will minimize impact. We have adopted a method of construction that reduces the time that we actually spend on the physical site itself, which is the idea that we assemble the bridge structure off-site to minimize impact. Like I said before, we have reached out to the City of Boston and to some other neighborhood groups such as the Dudley Street Neighborhood Initiative. We've reached out to them and we share with them what it is that we're trying to do. And we're hoping for additional feedback through that group, both from local population and businesses. As we proceed with the project, we will, our goal is that once we have the contractor on board, we'll have a lot more clarity as to how everything will unfold. And that information we will be sharing with the public. We do have a project site, a website established for this project. And I will encourage you to visit that site, as you will see the link on the overhead on the presentation page that you can utilize to access information on the project. But in addition to that, you can also contact the project team by via our email, and the email address is eastcottage@mbta.com. eastcottage@mbta.com. So you can reach us, ask your questions or clarifications or any other information that you might need, and we'll be glad to address those. So I just want to make a final call for questions. Do we have any question?
Nothing additional on the Q&A.
Yeah. Well, it appears that we don't have any questions. So all I can say now is that we thank you very much for joining us tonight. We do value your presence. And like I said before, in order to continue the dialogue, we have developed a project website through which members of the public can learn more about the project and submit their questions. And also, you can reach us via the email that I mentioned earlier. That is eastcottage@mbta.com. Thank you very much for your attendance tonight, and good night.
Thank you, everybody. Have a good evening.